Welcome everyone to this session of the path forward, and this time being with business. And I'm very excited to have you all here, and we have three amazing people that are going to be doing some speaking today, and I'm very excited about that. So I will go off and start doing the introductions with them, and then we'll jump in and let them share their wonderful information they have to share. So today we have three great speakers that are all going to talk about moving forward in your business. And it's really looking at you as a business leader, what you can do to continue to kind of flourish during this time. So we're not getting into the tactics as much. We have some, but really like what you can do for yourself and what you can do in terms of, so we're looking at resilience, we're looking at communication, especially we have Kristen, who's great. We're going to talk about that as we look at virtual, which all of us are doing and learning. And then Jenny talking about impact. So it's going to be a really great show. So first of all, the first speaker that we are going to have today is Jan Bosch. She has a doctorate in organizational psychology. She has a master's in education. She has, with ICF, a PCC. She has, and a lot of other ones with other initials, so I'm not going through all of them. But we're really lucky to have her here. She is a former administrator with over 30 years of experience leading, coaching, and educating. She has worked with directors in court systems, nationally and internationally, and private and not-for-profit entities across the country. Jan has a proven ability to refocus and change the performance of outcomes of clients who are at risk in their organization. She is actually a resident of Boise, Idaho, where I'm located now, moving recently from Vermont, correct? Yep, good. Next, then we're gonna have Kristen Holmberg. And Kristen is, speaking when Kristen's on here, it's like a little nervous. She's a speech coach and trainer. She helps clients acquire the master the communication skills needed to share their experience and lead their teams in a way that's clear, compelling, and confident. She's the owner of Idaho Speakers Bureau and speaker coach for TEDx Boise. She has nearly 20 years of speaking experience. Her clients include Fortune 50 companies like Google, Oracle, and HP. And last but not least, we have Jenny Heike. She is an author, speaker, and passionate coach to women and organizations. She's been helping people reach their full potential for over 17 years and has served in a variety of leadership roles within corporations, nonprofits, and ministry organizations. She is the founder and CEO of Her Team Success. She coaches women and teams through the process of strengthening their brand, finding purpose, and overcoming things that hold them back. She also works with a variety of companies on branding and applies her experience in marketing, leadership, communication to help her clients excel and grow. She's also the co-founder of Lift, Live Inspired Fearless Thriving, which hosts events and workshops that help gather women around the community. She began her career at Hewlett-Packard and then stepped in to do her dream jobs, which was writing several books and becoming a speaker and director of communications for an international nonprofit that fights human trafficking. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to kind of handle this going forward and then turn it over to Jan to get started. What we're going to do is each of the three speakers are going to do a little bit of a presentation, and after that, we'll have time for questions. At that point, so we can type them into the chat. But before, again, we get started, I almost forgot this because we threw it in at the last minute. I would love to see if you guys can, in the chat, put in how many of you are either like self-employed, own your own small business, or are working in some other kind of coaching capacity. It'd be great to see that in the chat. You guys would take a couple minutes to write that in. And while you're doing that, we'll let Jan get started and sharing her screen. And it looks like, you're founder and owner of a small business. Own a coaching business, and someone else who's just coaching business. So we have a lot of you guys are coaching businesses on here. And
Are we ready?
Yep, go for it, Jen. We'll let people type as we're going along.
Okay. Well, great. Well, welcome. And the timeliness of all of these sessions is, kind of serendipitous to where we are today in the world. And I want to lead off by talking about resiliency. And it's more than just the business resiliency, as you'll see as I go through the program. But the first thing I wanted to do was kind of come back to the definition of what coaching is, as we talk about the International Coach Federation, and they're kind of, I think, very well thought out what it means to work, with a coach. And that's that ICF defines it as a partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize both their personal and their professional potential. I think there's some very powerful words in this very short definition, including things like the partnership that's thought-provoking and taps into that creativity. And the reason I lead off with that is that now more than ever, as we look at our businesses, we need to get really creative. I'm not alone, as you are with your business, in the fact that, it went from one day I was booked through September and everything is wiped clean. And, we are trying to reconfigure ways in which we can deliver the services. The coaching I can do one-on-one, but a lot of my work had been also in education and training on coaching skills, and much of that work, although some can be done online, really is better suited to one-on-one. So we're all rethinking the way we do business. Let me get to my next slide here. So the first part of this program for you is the path forward, and again, I'm addressing resiliency. And why resiliency? And I think it's really important to remember that business resiliency is now the new paradigm. It's not like something that's going to come and go. It is the way we live. And we have to have those strategies for that business resiliency, whatever it is that is coming at us. What we know is it's not going to just be an end point and stop. So this short session that we're going to have in our time together is really just an overview of considerations for how to build and sustain business resiliency. What we know is our resiliency cannot be static. What we need is to have, agility in our systems to be able to move and to be able to adapt quickly. So what does it mean? Careful business resiliency planning can help mitigate the impacts of disruption and allow the return to function more quickly, whatever that, as we say, new normal is. So let me show you the one model. There's lots of models out there, and they generally say much of the same thing in different ways. But this one I thought was pretty simple. It's from the work of the CEO of a company called iVision. And let's look at each of these elements that work off of the center, which is the business resiliency planning. First one is culture. And, a culture is something that is very embedded and oftentimes difficult to change. But we want to look at shifting our culture so that the responsibility for business resiliency is not a person's job, but more that it's a strategy that gets engaged into the culture. The next one we're going to look at is people. And with that, tied back to culture is, as you're trying to shift the culture, your staff need to be trained and they need to understand their role and maybe their new role in business resiliency. And they also need to participate in exercises that strengthen, the muscle memory so that they are, if activated, they're in a position to be able to appropriately respond. Well, the processes, that's a big part of what we do, whether it's business resiliency planning or business continuity planning. They need to be aligned and they need to be able to adapt to the scenarios that you're testing out with your people, and that they need to, know the processes and procedures around a number of different areas. One is an incident, where it's a one-time event. One is a crisis, where it's a multi-year emergency, or crisis response. Infrastructure, what do we mean by that? Well, your basic organizational structures need to be aligned with your business expectations, and those business expectations may be looking both internally and also externally. And then let's take a look at leadership. You know, if you are the executive team, you know, I am my own, you know, CEO of my company, and I have subcontractors who work with me, and I have to periodically remind myself that I'm in a role as a team leader, and that my quote executive team needs to know the scope. You know, how do we move from response, and then how do we move back into transition? And then partners, and engage the right partners, you know, especially the partners who are involved with you around technology. And again, you want to ensure that your business alignment is in alignment with those partners. So that's a quick snapshot of the business resiliency. And I want to move next to talk about personal resiliency, because we don't do our work without the people. And so as we're talking about personal resilience, and down here I really like what it says, you know, just looking at the courage to kind of come back. More and more, I think a lot of us as coaches, a big part of what we're doing is helping people to really build strong and enduring resiliency skills. So when we're talking about some of the elements that contribute to personal resilience, one of them is meaningful participation and contribution. And you know, one of the best ways to bounce back is to help someone else. You know, again, at my age, I'm supposed to be maybe that higher risk group that shouldn't be out there trying to do my volunteer work. On the other hand, I know that I am at O negative, which is a universal blood donor, and I was at least able to get down and give blood. And that made me feel good. You know, we have to find those ways that we can give back and also help someone else. When we do that, it creates kind of a protective barrier for us. And, you know, even just talking with people about what they've done and how they've done it is an important way that can bring a sense of calm and well-being. High expectations. What do we mean by this? Well, we need to give people messages that let them know we believe in them, you know, that they are strong, and we support them as they, along with us, grapple with the complex and difficult situations we face ahead. Caring and support. That's one of the most powerful environmental protective factors there is. And it's particularly important that it come from that genuine, you know, heartfelt place. Caring and support from a few close people in our lives is the most important resiliency building condition that we can create. Our life skills development really falls into kind of two key areas. One is EQ, which is that emotional intelligence, which helps us to navigate social and emotional situations. And the second is more focused on those key skills and tasks. And that's back to, you know, what do your staff need to be able to do and be able to move through so that they respond, recover, and then ultimately move to thriving. And then clear, consistent boundaries. We need to develop the ability to say no, to stand up for ourselves when necessary, and creating those clear and consistent boundaries also means developing a sense of who we are. And we've had a lot of time, I'm sure, many of us, to kind of sit right now with who are we and who are we going to be going forward. And then the pro-social bonding, and that is really important. So we're all kind of experiencing it very differently, but the productive condition comes when we find ways to develop new hobbies or talents or just learn something new. And I'm going to posit here that leaders can play a vital role in supporting others to build their personal resilience. And finally, let me kind of move forward with, you know, what we're really looking at here is hope, which is vital. You know, as leaders or in our own organizations, we have to create hope through empathy. We have to create action through thoughtful impact. And when I say thoughtful impact, that's really about moving from intent, being able to follow that continuum all the way to say, what is that impact? So moving forward, we need to generate that hope. And we do this by showing empathy. And I would add that we also do that by showing some of our own vulnerability. We also need to transition to action, and we need to do that with the end in mind. Consideration given to the thoughtful impact of the changes on you, your staff, your customers, and your community. And I will close with this. And finally, there's an interdependence that I think is really vital for all of us as small business owners, that our resiliency comes from not our business resiliency alone, but our business resiliency coupled with our personal resiliency. And ultimately, we all share that, responsibility for our overall well-being as a community. We are all responding, and we are all moving to recovery. And as we move forward from managing the crisis to then managing the transition, it's really, what will it mean? And this is the coaching question I'm going to leave you with. What will it mean for you and your business to thrive in this new resiliency paradigm? And thanks for your time. So, you're muted, Deb.
There we go. Sorry. I know I forgot I muted myself as I was going along. Thank you very much, Jen. It's great information there. We want to open it up to questions. And when you guys are thinking of them, you can do two different things. You can do a thing where you can raise your hand. If you look on by your participation thing, there should be a place to raise your hand, or you can type into the chat box any questions you have for Jan. And we have a few minutes left. But one of the questions I have, Jan, what is the difference? Because you're talking about resiliency here, and I've also heard a lot about business continuity. So what's the difference to kind of preparing for business resiliency and business continuity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that there's a lot of similarities, because both business continuity and business resiliency focus on the processes and procedures, that kind of help us to mitigate those unexpected threats or events. Where I think resiliency is a little bit different is that its focus is how best to, kind of preserve value in a changing, complex environment. And so the resiliency is more around the issue of the fact that the change is going to be really constant. It's a different kind of, a different kind of threats, and they're complex. And like I said here in this last slide, that they're very interconnected. But both the continuity and both resiliency also need to address processes and procedures.
Okay. And then what is the risk of not planning and thinking about, like, we kind of, like you said, you were talking about, you were going along, everything was fine, and then everything kind of fell off what you were supposed to be doing. So what is the risk of not kind of planning for these kind of events or thinking that they're going to happen?
Well, I think the first and foremost is when you have a dependence on, your business to be able to generate income, that there's a risk of that significant financial loss. And it really says, what are the buffers that we have in there so that if this happens, we can, ride the wave, if you will, until we get back to whatever it is we need to get back to. I think there's also, in communities, that the way we handle and respond is really about our reputation. And when we're not in a position, to be able to respond and then recover and ultimately to get back to thriving, we run that risk of damaging our reputation. Quite frankly, there's also those threats to life, health, and safety, just those things that we know that happen from whether it's a weather event or, the pandemic event that we're in now, or an IT event. Of course, we've already talked about the threats to just disruption of business continuity if there is no kind of pre-planning. It's also, again, back here where we're talking about community, personal resiliency, and business resiliency, it's about, the risk is that it's our inability to recover quickly and to be able to tap into that resiliency that allows us to adapt and adjust. It can have a severe environmental impact. I mean, we can think, any of us, a number of events where, things hadn't gone well, and the oil spills or whatever they are that have these huge long-term impacts that have to be addressed. It's our inability also to really see ourselves and support ourselves as a member of a community. A community who is hurting from all of the changes that come from, these unanticipated or unexpected events, and also to help that, with that community healing. So those are some of the risks, if not.
And there's a question in the chat box. I think it'd be great actually, because it's more of a general question to people too, to answer back in the chat box a little bit, which was from Barry Levy. And what kind of community work have you heard companies are doing? Our team did fill the trucks and raised over 31,000 meals and over 4K for St. Mary's Food Bank. And are there any other, I thought that was awesome. Any other ideas? And I want to kind of move on, because that's, unless you know something specifically, Jan, I think it would be great to hear from everyone else in the chat box at some point before we go, to see what other kind of things that people are doing in the community during this time, because it's really affected a lot of people. So we'll do that in the chat box. And with that, we'll move on to Kirsten, unless there's any other questions that I have missed. Okay. We'll move on. So Jan, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and we'll move on to Kirsten. Kirsten, I'm saying it wrong. I always do that. I want to call you Kristen, and I'm like, I started correcting myself each time.
It happens to the best of us, and it's been happening my whole life. So no worries. No worries at all. So Jan, thanks so much for your words as it relates to resiliency. And I love that many of the concepts that you referenced are actually also applicable to communication. And communication is, of course, another vital part of doing business, but especially so in a crisis such as the one that we're in. To sustain your business activities right now, to be resilient, requires communication internally with your teams and externally with your clients and customers. It looked like most of the people that were on the call today are actually coaches, although there are a couple of exceptions. But listen, no matter who you are, we're all the BBC dad now, aren't we? Working from home, figuring out how to do this with animals and families and conservative bandwidth, all of that. So we're doing our best. What I want to share with you all today are 3 guiding principles that will ensure that your communication is effective during this season and going forward. These principles apply today, but they also will apply in the future. I'm focusing our attention on virtual meetings and virtual communication because, of course, we've seen this massive uptick in it, as you all see by being part of this particular meeting. And most of us were ill-equipped for that transition. We didn't have the skills. And so I want to be sure that we can impart some guiding principles that will help you do that better during this time frame. So to communicate effectively right now and in the future, I want you to think about being empathetic, intentional, and concise. So the first guiding principle is empathy. In your communication, I want you to prioritize the people. When we're stressed and distracted and disrupted, which all of us are right now, it's very easy to default to task mode. We start thinking about just getting things done and forgetting that we're human and have limitations, and the people that we're working with also have those same limitations, maybe in a different form. So we need to remember that we're human and that they on the other side of the screen are human. We're not watching a movie. So to do that, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions before you even get on a virtual call. The first question is just simply take stock of how you are feeling. What's going on in your day and how is it affecting you and your mood and your stress level? Because those things show up on camera and they show up in our word choice and the tone of voice. So checking in with ourselves. How did that last call go? Am I feeling a little frustrated? By checking in, we're going to do a better job of softening anything that might have come across as abrasive. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, what do I know about the other participants in this meeting? How are they feeling? Distracted, stressed, lonely, overwhelmed? Because when you can pause to think about how they might be feeling, then you're going to be able to tailor your communication just instinctively to be delivered in a way that they will better receive it. So pausing to ask those two questions will help make sure that the tone that you set in your meeting, both in your delivery and your understanding of the people that are there, is going to be much more conducive to effective communication. Once you actually join the call, if you're the leader, I want to suggest that you actually take a moment to connect with the other participants. This is human. It's what we do when we're meeting together in conference rooms or coffee shops. But right now, it's easy to omit that. Again, that task mode sets in. But asking each other a question that's maybe a little less vague than how are you, and more specific to be, did you get outside today? Or what went really well or really poorly in the last 24 hours? That helps us all check in with one another in a really constructive, specific way. But no matter what, I want you to prioritize the people, and I want you to hold them in mind and yourself as you enter these virtual communications. The second guiding principle is intentionality. I want you to be really intentional with your activities in virtual communication. If you are the person that has called the meeting, I hope that you have actually decided whether or not that meeting is necessary. Maybe a different format of communication would be just as effective, in which case probably most of the people might benefit from not having that meeting take place. But if you're planning the meeting, I want you to plan, send, and stick to an agenda. Lots of times, especially coaches don't feel like this needs to take place, but even just reiterating the structure of your meetings with your clients will help them know what the expectations are. This map, if you will, of the time that you're going to spend together reduces the cognitive load that we're all feeling. This is a way that we can give each other some certainty, even if it's only for 30 to 60 minutes. We're coping with so much ambiguity. This is a gift to one another. Sending it ahead, telling people whether you expect them to be on camera and when you need their input is really helpful. Then as it relates to intentionality, whether you're leading or participating, I want you to be really attentive to the meeting itself. It's really easy for all of us to multitask, grab the phone, flip to another application on the computer. But if you can attend the meeting and set aside those distractions, your meetings are going to be more effective because you're going to be more efficient and focused on the task at hand. But in addition to that, when we're all trying to surmise what the other person is thinking or feeling through a lens, our distraction, simply opening an application or checking our calendar, will potentially be misread by someone on the other side of the screen as negative, that they might interpret that as you're being dissatisfied or disappointed in their communication. So give each other the gift of attending fully in your meetings and being present. And whether you're leading or participating, I also want to suggest that when you know you have to say something in a meeting, take a couple of minutes before you get on to just jot down your talking points. And I'm talking about bullets with 1 or 2 words attached to them. This will make sure that you say what you really want to say, in addition to not saying more. This is how we make sure that our meetings stay on time. So those are a few ways that you can practice intentionality in your virtual communications. Next, I want you to think about simplicity as your third guiding principle, being concise. Simplicity does not mean simple-minded. This is elegant, effective, and memorable. By using short sentences and simple language, we will help each other. When we're stressed, it's difficult to process information. Again, that cognitive load sets in. We want to make it easier for each other to assimilate the information that's being communicated. Governor Cuomo, when he was addressing the New Yorkers and asking them to basically stay home, is perfectly qualified as a lawyer and a politician to use very eloquent language. But do you know what he said to New Yorkers? He said this: stay home, stop the spread, save lives. Simple, straightforward language. You can do that too. Resist the temptation to use eloquent language. Similar to what Governor Cuomo said, he used the rule of 3s, and I want to suggest that for all of us too. Our brains are very conditioned to memorizing and remembering just about 3 things at a time. So if you can limit your remarks, or at least group them into 3 separate categories, it's much easier for people to remember and then act on what you're sharing with them, reducing the cognitive load and making it actionable and memorable. And finally, as it relates to simplicity and being concise, I want you to consider reducing the length of your meetings. David Silverman, 2009, wrote an article about changing the default meeting times from 60 and 30 to 50 and 25. And I think that is probably one of the most useful pieces of information and suggestions that we could all adhere to right now. Because when we used to stand up in between meetings and move to a different conference room or hop in the car and go meet somebody else, our eyes took a break, our minds took a break, and our bodies took a break. And right now, we're jumping from call to call to call. So sticking to that agenda, but determining that it's only going to be a 50-minute meeting lets you end on time, give yourself and the other people a break, as well as gives you that opportunity to do the check-in that I suggested at the beginning, to ask yourself, how am I and how are the people I'm going to be interacting with? So I want you to use the guiding principle of simplicity in your interactions. Your virtual meetings and really all of your communication will be more effective when you are empathetic, intentional, and concise. So with that, I'm just going to leave you with these wise words from Franklin Roosevelt. Be sincere, be brief, and be seated. Thank you.
Keep forgetting to unmute myself. Excellent. Thank you so much. So one of the things, in Kirsten, you talked about this earlier to me, is you have a tip sheet you were talking about too. You could send everyone if they did the text chat to 33777. What is the?
Yep, and
it's a tip sheet for
that has all of the things you should think about before you're conducting a meeting. Things like setting up your virtual environment. What do you need to look for? All the things that relate to sound and lighting, posture, nonverbal communication. Those are all included on that tip sheet. So if somebody wants to text the word chat to 33777, I'm happy to send that over. But I'd be happy to highlight a few of those right now if that would be helpful, unless we've got other questions. Okay.
No, one of the ones is what are some like really strategic things? I'm sitting here and doing a lot of virtual, and I moved upstairs because I can actually plug in, because my Wi-Fi kept going in and out. So that was one of the things they did, so I didn't lose people. But then I have, this ugly blank wall back here, and I'm at a weird desk and a weird angle. So what are some tips you can give people to like do better on virtual meetings?
Right. Well, I recognize that we're all dealing with different environments, but actually I want to suggest that the most important thing we prioritize is sound. Because even if I can't see you, if I can hear you, we can still get business done. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I will call in, and I did it today. I actually dial into the meeting by phone as well. So if I see that my internet connection isn't working, I can just unmute my phone and begin to continue the meeting in that way, shape, or form. Plus, I'm going to add that if you don't have a wired headset, well, wired headsets would be your best way to actually make sure your sound is effective. It generally comes through the most clearly if you're on a wired headset. The second most effective is your laptop or your desktop microphone. And third choice really should be your Bluetooth. The sound quality really changes. So prioritize sound. And if you are going to use the wire, you can thread those wires through your shirt and plug them in to be a little bit less visually distracting online. But then, of course, and most people know this, although I'm still surprised in the virtual calls I'm on, you got to prioritize your lighting after you've prioritized sound. We need to be able to see your face. The reason we're all experiencing Zoom fatigue is because we're decoding so much nonverbal language that is harder to do through virtual means. And so being lit well by being near a window or buying an inexpensive lighting rig, make sure we can see your face, that you're smiling, we can better interpret those cues. And then, of course, I also believe that if you are leading the meeting, you should be on screen. You need to make the decision about whether or not your team needs to be on screen and communicate to them that in advance, ideally with your agenda. But you should be on screen. As the leader, you need to be the one who's setting the tone, and people need to see your faces right now. So take the hit, be on screen. I know it's hard, but I recommend it.
Yeah, especially, with not going out. It's like one of my friends wrote something about wearing something matching. Her husband said, "Where are we going today?" Because, they haven't been out of the house for days. She's like, "I just wanted to look good." So, no, that's good. Any other questions that people have, write into the chat box here or raise your hand, the virtual raise the hand, or raise your hand like this too, if we see it. Any other questions right now? So I have, okay. One other one where they're doing, what about, so we're talking about the kind of communication, visually, because we're doing these kind of virtual calls. What about in written communication in this time? Do you have any kind of tips on the written?
I would say very similar principles. Everything we've talked about is really applicable in that forum as well. Keeping them brief, simple sentence structure, making it easy for people to read because they're going to skim. But before you send anything out over email, I actually recommend that people take 2 proofreads of it. Let it sit overnight, pick it up the next morning, and look at it for the typos and the sentence structure, and make sure you didn't have anything glaring in your communication, because we all want to conduct ourselves professionally. But the second proofread should be an emotional proofread. This is where, was I angry when I was writing it? Was I stressed when I was writing it? Because that can come through. And then thinking about it again, how is the person on the other end of this email correspondence, the newsletter, blog post, or whatever it might be, how are they going to receive it? And think about it from their perspective. So that double proofread and looking at it for 2 different reasons is, I think, a really important part of communicating right now, especially.
Good. And then I have another question on here from Ronald. Eye contact is a pain. Any solutions? You're not looking at the camera and you're looking at your screen. So what are some thoughts on the eye contact part?
Well, I'm interpreting his question, and I may not be correct about it. I'm interpreting his question on how to get better at it. Is that how you read that question, Deb?
Yeah, or Ronald, do you want to unmute yourself and just say the question? Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is the camera, and if I look at it, then you can tell that I'm looking at you, right?
Yes.
But I can't look at that and see what I need to be looking at. So how do I be more eye contacty?
Right. Well, I think it's kind of a matter of training yourself to do it. If you legitimately need to read something off of your screen, then of course you're going to have to look at it. Maybe somebody's interacting with you and they said, what do you think of that email or that graph? And you've got to look at it. Of course, you need to look at your screen. But if you're presenting and you're talking to somebody, you're trying to indicate that you're making eye contact with them, to train yourself to do that, I would suggest a couple of things. One, and it sounds silly, sometimes people tape a picture of a face over their lens, and that lets them actually look at the face as though it is the person they're talking to. So we kind of condition ourselves that way. But also, if you're using notes, or even right now, I have the picture, the window up right next to my camera. That way I can look at you and it looks like I'm looking at my camera. Does that make sense? So positioning what you need, whether it's notes or a visual, putting those close to your camera will really help with that.
You look like you're looking right at me.
Good.
And I just realized now that when you share your screen, there's a little picture of you that I can put right up near there. How does this look?
Better.
Because I'm now looking at your picture and not the camera.
It makes
Okay.
a difference.
Great,
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I think that's probably the extent of the time that we have here. We got to pass this over to Jenny to relate all of her fantastic wisdom for having maximum impact during this season and going forward. So I will make sure that I am stopping sharing my screen and that we can pass the baton over to Jenny.
Thank you, Kirsten, so much. I appreciate that. And thank you, Jan, as well, for what you shared. It's interesting. I hear overlap in our talks with hope and intentionality and all that good stuff. So let me just get this swapped here. Okay, so what I am going to be talking about is impact. And how can we have the greatest impact in and through our businesses in today's challenging environment? And I mean, there's no question at all, we have all been impacted by COVID-19 in some way. We all have a story. You know, for me, even just in my business, a large part of what I do is speaking. And so you can imagine with all the events and conferences getting rescheduled, I've had to really take a look at pivoting and take a look at that offering and say, how can I shift that so I can still be adding value to my clients and my customers? And so business has certainly been impacted that way. And then on a personal level, I have, I'm here at home. My husband works at HP, and so he is in the office across the way, working 100% at home now. And then my son, who goes to college in Phoenix, Arizona, he came home from spring break and never went back. And so he's been finishing his semester off here at home. And I'm sure for those of you who have college-age kids, you're in the same boat. And then tragically, my husband has a friend who lived on the East Coast, and he was a business client, and he lost his life to COVID. So that was really a kind of a wake-up call. So we've all been impacted in some way, shape, or form. But what I want to talk about in our short time together today is how, in the middle of how we're all being impacted and how life has just been sort of upended for many of us in different areas, how we can have the greatest positive impact moving forward. And I want to start off with just some research that Gallup has done. So Gallup has looked at what people need in times of crisis all the way back to Pearl Harbor. They looked at this during 9/11, and they've been doing a ton of research right now during this COVID crisis, and almost weekly research. And so what they found is that people need 4 key things during times of crisis, and it's right there on the slide. But we need a clear plan of action. We need to feel well prepared to do our job. We need to be well informed, and we need to feel cared about. So this is true for us, and it's true for our employees, our teams, our clients, the people that we work with. So I encourage you to keep those 4 things in mind as we talk about what we can do to have an impact. And I really just want to cover 2 practical but powerful reminders for us to think about when we're wanting to have a positive impact in today's climate. And the first is to check in regularly. And when I say this, I mean check in with, from a business standpoint, but also check in with yourself. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about what that means. And then, of course, we're going to have time of Q&A, and I can share some more practical things maybe that I've been doing or that I'm seeing other businesses do in this area. But something important to keep in mind is, and there are studies coming out all the time. You've probably read them. You might have heard of some of them, but people are experiencing record levels of stress and worry right now. And our pain points are magnified in times of challenge and crisis. So whatever you might have been feeling in terms of your business, challenges or stress, or whatever your clients or potential clients might have been feeling, those are often magnified in times like today. And so this idea of checking in with others is so important. And so when I'm talking about checking in with others related to your business, keep in mind that especially in times like now when we have so much virtual communication, we have isolation, we're not meeting in coffee shops, we're not meeting for conferences and meetings and events. Checking in with people is so important to be able to keep that connection. And so check in with your team if you have a team, check in with those who you work with, and also check in with your clients, like even past clients. That's something that I've been doing in this time, is checking in with my past coaching clients and touching base with them and seeing how they're doing and getting updates and just having that real personal touch. So it's an opportunity to reach out to your business networks, reach out to previous clients, and be able to check in. And then from a personal standpoint, and this is so important, because whether you're a solopreneur or you work at a company, a lot of times we are so focused on either business or on other people that we forget to check in with ourselves. And if we are not thriving, our businesses are not going to thrive either. And so it's so important to be able to pause and stop. And this looks different for all of us, but to even ask the simple question, and Kirsten, you mentioned this as well in your talk, but how am I doing? How am I feeling? Even simple things like, am I hungry? I mean, there have been days where I've been hunkered down in my office and I'll just go Zoom call to Zoom call to coaching call to coaching call, and I'll be like 2 or 3 p.m. like I'm starving. And so being able to pause and check in with yourself is so key in times like what we're dealing with right now. So check in with others and check in with yourself. And then the second important reminder, again, it's practical, but it's powerful. From a business standpoint, take this opportunity to work on your business and yourself, not just in your business. So a lot of times, especially if you have your own coaching business or your own business, a lot of times we are so focused on the whirlwind, right? So we are responding to what's urgent all the time, not necessarily what's critical. And so this gives us a unique opportunity to pause and really take a step back and take a look at things like, what are our goals for our business? You know, what are our plans? Another key thing to think about, especially for your coaching business, is how have the needs of your potential customers or your customers shifted during this time? You know, what's different for them? And then how can you meet them where they're at to add the greatest value? So for me, I mentioned speaking that I do in addition to my coaching. And I have taken this time to take a step back and say, okay, how can I change this offering to make it available to people maybe in an online workshop? And then even taking the time to, look at your website, go through the wording on your website and see what you might need to pivot for your messaging so that it doesn't sound tone deaf. I realized I went to my speaking website and it was talking about coming to your event or conference. And so being able to take time to work on my business and go through that and change that so that if somebody's visiting my website, they can see that this is a virtual offering or this is an online workshop. So work on your business, not just in your business. But in addition to that, and I think even more importantly, is taking this time to work on you and to work on yourself. You know, I said, if you're not thriving, your business is not going to thrive. And little things like, if you haven't done a strengths assessment, take the time to do a strengths assessment. My favorite is the Clifton 2.0 strength assessment. And I find too that a lot of times we'll take something like that and we'll go, oh, that's so cool. You know, that's totally me. And then we file it away in the drawer and kind of forget about it. And so I encourage you, if you've done an assessment in the past, dig it back out and read it and really take this time to not only understand your strengths, but to be able to lean into those, because the more investment you put into your natural talents, the stronger they become, the more they become true strengths. And the other thing I would say too, in this area of really using this time for professional and personal development, is think about your personal brand. And this is so important especially if you are a solopreneur or an entrepreneur and you're really creating your own company, your own coaching practice. Really think about, who are you? And what do you want to be known for? How do you want people to see and experience you? And a lot of times when we think about personal branding, we think about social media and online presence, and that is certainly a piece of it. But whether you're on social media or not, you have a personal brand. And so now is a great time to be able to think about that and strengthen it and maximize it. And then think about how that connects to your company and the people that you're trying to serve, because the more you know about yourself and the more you understand what differentiates you, the better able you are to, the more you're able to serve people, the more you're able to see problems or situations or needs out in the marketplace and say, okay, here's how I can help with that. Here's how I can add true value. So take the time to work on your business and to work on yourself. And this is an area that coaching can definitely help with. And if this is an area, if I could answer any questions on personal branding or anything like that, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk through any of that with you and help you with that process. And the last thing that I would say is keep it simple, because every interaction, we're not talking about making huge steps to make huge impact. Every interaction that you have is an opportunity for you to make a positive impact. And right now for our businesses, it's really hard to make big shifts and big changes. And in fact, right now is probably not the right time to be doing that because there's so much uncertainty in the future. But little changes, little steps, little actions, simple things like picking up the phone instead of sending that email and checking in with that person, following up with a previous client, getting up from your chair and away from your laptop and going for it, even if it's a 15-minute walk. So little, don't let it be overwhelming, like, oh, I want to make a big impact during this time. How do I do that? Really just think about, what can I do today? Who can I call today? Who can I encourage today? And I love what I think it was Kirsten or Jan talked about hope, because we all need hope right now. We need hope. Our clients need hope. The people that we work with need hope. And each of you have something unique to offer. Each of you has something, and your business offering is unique too, and that can provide hope to people. And so going back to really just being intentional and taking little steps and realizing that every interaction we have is truly an opportunity to make a positive impact. So with that, I will open it up, turn it back over to Deb, and we'll, I think, do Q&A for the last few minutes.
Yes, we will. Does anybody, oh, lost it there? Questions? Does anybody want to type in or raise your hand first? Or I have a couple questions too, but if anyone else, I wanted to open it up. Or you can start typing right now and we'll come back to it in a second. Oh, Jan, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I do have a question
Okay.
because I think that talking about impact, I was curious about your thoughts around, we're kind of in this, responding stage, maybe moving into recovery. And that, when you move from that transition, I, think that, or I guess I'm curious about your thoughts about how to really move impact into being able to thrive in a potentially different environment, if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And it's actually something that I've been wrestling with as a small business owner, and really wanting to be sensitive to the current situation and how everybody is being impacted right now, but also wanting to be, prepared for the future and moving forward. And I think what I would say to that, one of the key things that comes to mind too is doing it together in community. And that's why I love that these, sessions are being held. And there's so many different webinars and things that we can dial into. But even as coaches coming alongside each other and supporting each other in that transition, sharing what we're doing with one another, learning from one another, I think is going to be so key, because none of us really knows what does the new normal look like. We don't know that. And will there be a new normal? And so really, this is not a time, in my opinion, to fly solo, and being able to do it together, I think, is going to be key in making that transition successfully.
Yeah, thanks. I really like that you used the word connection, because I think, we are learning to connect with each other in a very, different way. But for me, having been in this shelter at home, the need for connection has been really just, heightened for me. And,
Yeah.
All my good friends, a lot of them live in Vermont, but every Sunday we get on, and it's comforting just to see and hear and laugh with things that are familiar.
Yeah. And I will say too, I read an article that talked about this idea of being alone has now really transitioned to a true feeling of loneliness for so many. And that's why, back to the idea of check in regularly, it's so important in today's time. And loneliness can actually, and I'm sure you've all read studies on this as well, it can have physical symptoms. We can be physically affected by that feeling of isolation and truly being lonely and alone. So.
Good. Any other questions? And I'm going to ask, what is one of the things people can do during this time to work on their personal brand? I think that's important, and it's an area a lot of people, including me, kind of struggle with. Like, what is that personal brand?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate the idea of personal branding. And at the end of the day, it's really you. And again, it's what are you known for? What do you want to be known for? How do people see and experience you? And so, if you think about it, your personal brand really impacts your company brand, especially if you have your own coaching and consulting practice. A lot of times, our personal brand drives the branding of our coaching practice. And so one of the simplest things that you can do is really take a step back and think about what differentiates you. And so when I work with people on personal branding, we go through a series of things where we build their toolbox and we say, okay, what are your core values? What are your non-negotiables? We look at what are your strengths? What are the things, what are your innate talents, right? What are your passions? What are the things that light you up, that just fuel your fire? They energize you, they don't drain you. What are your skills? Those are like your resume differentiators. What are your shaping experiences in your life? Because a lot of times we go through things and we just blaze through them and we move on to the next. We don't really pause and stop and say, okay, how did that uniquely equip me and prepare me for what I can be doing? So for example, I was the director of communications in a nonprofit that rescued girls from sex trafficking for 3 years. And that experience fueled my passion to help equip and empower women so much. And I take that into the work that I do with women today. And part of the reason I named my coaching practice Her Team Success is I have such a passion for helping women. So for you, think about, just it doesn't have to be complicated. Go through that list of things and think about what fuels you, what your strengths are. And when you come out of that, you come out of that with clarity on what differentiates you. And that informs and impacts your company's brand as well.
Thank you.
Does that help, Deb?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's, I think I always do try to make it more complicated.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's like, perfect.
Yeah.
So with that, we have about 3 minutes left. I want to thank so much, Jan, Kirsten, and Jenny, so much. You have wonderful information. It's been great. I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us. We're learning